Ethan Walker's mornings always started the same way. The alarm clock rang at 5:30 a.m., sharp and cold, and he would rise slowly from his bed, careful not to wake his daughter, Lily, who slept in the next room. The house was small, old, and worn from years of use, but to Ethan it was enough. It was safe, it was warm, and it was home. He walked to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and looked out the window at the quiet street. His eyes carried both calmness and weight. Once those same eyes had scanned distant battlefields, measuring wind speed and distance, calculating the angle of a shot with deadly precision. Now they looked at cracked pavement, an overgrown yard, and a mailbox that leaned a little too far to the left. Life had changed. Ethan had been a Marine, a sniper with medals that once gleamed proudly on his uniform. But those days were behind him. Now he was a single dad, raising Lily with as much patience and love as he could muster. His greatest battles were no longer fought overseas. They were fought at the kitchen table, helping with math homework, packing lunch boxes, and reminding his daughter that she was stronger than the world believed. On that particular morning, Lily padded into the kitchen, her hair messy from sleep. "Daddy, are you going today?" she asked softly, rubbing her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan replied, pouring her a glass of orange juice. "It's just a demonstration." "Nothing serious." She tilted her head curiously. "Will you use the orange rifle?" Ethan smiled. That rifle was special. Years ago, after his service ended, he had brought home his old sniper rifle. It was scratched, faded, and tired, but it was his most trusted companion. One afternoon, when Lily was only 5 years old, she had found it resting in its case. She didn't see a weapon. She saw something she wanted to make brighter. With her little hands, she painted it with orange craft paint. When Ethan saw it, he was stunned at first. But then Lily grinned up at him and said, "Now you won't lose it, Daddy, and it will make you smile." From that day on, the rifle became more than just a tool. It became a symbol of love, memory, and the bond between father and daughter. "Of course," Ethan said, now ruffling Lily's hair, "I'll use the orange rifle." The drive to the Marine training range was long and quiet. Ethan's truck rattled down the road, its engine tired but dependable, much like its owner. As he approached the gates, he could already see groups of young Marines gathering, their uniforms crisp, their boots shining, their laughter ringing out in the cool morning air. When Ethan stepped out of his truck, carrying the orange rifle in its worn case, the atmosphere shifted. A few of the younger Marines noticed immediately. Their eyes widened and whispers spread quickly. "Is that orange?" one asked. "Looks like a toy," another chuckled. "Who brings something like that here?" a third muttered, shaking his head. Ethan heard it all but said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was its own kind of strength. He simply walked forward, his step steady, his expression calm. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to prove himself. He was here because he had been invited, and because part of him missed the smell of gunpowder, the sound of shots echoing across an open range, and the feeling of belonging, even if only for a moment. As the event began, the Marines lined up to demonstrate their skills. One by one, they raised their rifles, aimed with precision, and fired. The shots cracked through the air, each one striking its target with confidence. Applause followed, along with nods of approval. The recruits were sharp, disciplined, and proud. Ethan stood quietly at the back, watching. He didn't mind being an observer. He had lived this life before in a time when it mattered far more than applause. He could still remember the nights overseas when each shot was measured in more than points. It was measured in lives, in survival, in silence that followed long after the mission ended. But here, on this range, it was different. This was about skill, practice, and pride. For the young Marines, it was about proving themselves. For Ethan, it was simply about remembering. "Hey, old man," one Marine called out with a grin. "You going to join or just stand there with your paint job?" More laughter followed. Ethan glanced at them briefly, his face unreadable. He could have explained. He could have told them the story of his daughter, of the orange paint that turned a weapon into a gift. But he didn't. Those stories were not for them. They were for Lily, and for himself. As the sun rose higher, the range grew busier. The smell of smoke hung in the air. The sound of rifles echoed like distant thunder. Marines joked, cheered, and competed. Ethan finally set his case down on the table and unzipped it slowly. The orange rifle gleamed in the sunlight, its color bright and unusual against the sea of black and gray weapons around it. More heads turned. More laughter spread. "Is he serious?" someone whispered. "That thing belongs in a toy store. Bet he can't even hit the close target." But Ethan didn't react. He carefully checked the scope, adjusted the strap, and let his fingers run along the familiar grooves of the rifle. It felt the same as it always had, steady, strong, loyal. The paint didn't change its weight. It didn't change its history. And it didn't change the skill of the man who carried it. As he prepared, memories came flooding back. The long nights of waiting, lying still for hours. The sound of radio static in his ear. The steady breathing he had practiced until it was second nature. And always the weight of responsibility. The knowledge that each decision mattered more than anything else. But just as quickly, another memory rose above the rest. Lily's laughter. Her small hands holding the paintbrush. Her bright eyes filled with pride as she showed him what she had done. That memory softened him, steadied him, and gave him strength in a way no battlefield ever had. For Ethan, this rifle wasn't just about war anymore. It was about love. It was about being a father. At the edge of the range, a few older veterans noticed him and nodded respectfully. They didn't laugh, they knew. They had seen enough to understand that appearances meant little. They understood that every man carried his own story, and every rifle had its own history. Ethan caught their eyes and gave a small nod in return. That was enough. By the time the demonstration break was called, Ethan had not yet fired a single shot. The young Marines continued to joke, their words sharp but harmless. But beneath their laughter was a sense of curiosity. Who was this man? Why was he here? And why did he carry that strange, brightly painted rifle with such quiet pride? Ethan sat on a bench at the side of the range, sipping water from his bottle, the rifle resting across his knees. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here for something greater, something they could not yet see. And deep down, though he would never admit it aloud, he was here for Lily. So that when she asked him again about the orange rifle, he could tell her truthfully that it had not been laughed at in vain, that it had stood tall, just like he always had. The Marine training range grew louder as the day went on. The crack of rifles echoed like rolling thunder across the wide, dusty field. Brass casings glittered on the ground under the sunlight, scattered like fallen leaves. Groups of young Marines stood in clusters, adjusting their gear, laughing with each other, and occasionally glancing toward Ethan Walker and his bright orange rifle. Ethan sat quietly on a wooden bench, his rifle resting across his knees. His back was straight, his face calm, and his hands steady. He did not fidget, he did not explain, and he did not respond to the whispers that followed him wherever he went. He was used to it. After years of service and years of raising his daughter alone, he had learned that silence was not weakness. It was discipline. But the whispers continued. "That thing doesn't even look real," one Marine said, nudging his friend, painted like a toy. "Why would anyone bring that here?" Another asked. "Maybe he's just here to watch. No way he's shooting with that thing," a third added. The laughter that followed was sharp but also uncertain. Beneath their jokes was a quiet curiosity, a question none of them dared to ask aloud. Who is this man? And why does he carry himself like someone who doesn't need to prove anything? Ethan leaned back slightly, letting his eyes wander across the range. He watched the young recruits, their faces filled with energy and pride. Their movements were sharp, their uniforms neat, and their rifles shining in the sun. They reminded him of himself many years ago, when he first stepped into training, eager to prove his worth to everyone around him. But now, as an older man and a single father, Ethan felt no such hunger. He had nothing left to prove to the world. His life was not about medals or respect anymore. It was about raising Lily, guiding her through school, teaching her kindness, and reminding her that she was never alone. The orange rifle was not a tool of war to him anymore. It was a reminder of love, of family, of the little girl who had painted it with her own hands. Still, the weight of the whispers pressed on him. He didn't care what they thought, but he could not deny the sting of their laughter. Not for himself, but because he imagined what Lily would say if she heard them. She would frown, tilt her head, and ask, "Why are they laughing, Daddy? Don't they know it's special?" And Ethan would have to tell her that sometimes people laugh at what they do not understand. The shooting continued. Marines fired at targets lined up at different distances. At 500 meters, bullets struck paper with quick precision. At 1,000 meters, the air grew heavier, and not every shot found its mark. By 2,000 meters, even the confident recruits began to falter. A group of young men stood behind their spotting scopes, shouting out directions and corrections. Some hit, some missed, but all tried with determination. Every cheer for a good shot was followed by teasing for a missed one. It was part of their bond, friendly competition mixed with pride. Ethan observed them closely. He could see the adjustments they made, the mistakes they repeated, and the frustration that grew on their faces when they missed the long-range target. To him, it was all familiar. He had once trained men just like them. He had once stood in their place, sweating under the sun, his heart racing, his hands trembling. He remembered what it felt like to want respect so badly that even one mistake felt like failure. Now, though, he understood something they didn't. Respect earned from others fades quickly. The only respect that lasts is the respect you earn within yourself. At one point, a Marine turned toward Ethan and raised his voice. "Hey, old-timer, you gonna take a shot or just sit there with your toy?" Laughter broke out again. Ethan looked up, met the young man's eyes, and simply smiled. He said nothing. That silence made the Marine uncomfortable, and he quickly turned back toward his group. The older veteran standing at the far side of the range noticed, however. They had been quiet all morning, watching both the recruits and Ethan. Unlike the younger men, they did not laugh. They exchanged small nods between themselves, as if silently agreeing that Ethan was not someone to underestimate. They knew that kind of silence. They had carried it themselves. As the morning gave way to noon, the general himself arrived. His presence was unexpected, and it immediately shifted the energy of the range. Conversations quieted, Marines straightened their backs, and nervousness flickered in their eyes. The general walked with calm authority, his uniform neat, his steps deliberate. He observed the recruits firing, giving nods of approval when shots landed well and small corrections when they missed. His eyes were sharp, his manner serious, but his voice carried encouragement. Eventually his gaze fell upon Ethan. He paused, noticing the bright orange rifle. For a moment the general said nothing, simply studying the older man sitting quietly at the edge of the range. Then he spoke. "And you, veteran," the general said, his voice deep and commanding. "You've been sitting there all morning. Let's see what you've got." The Marines fell silent instantly. Every head turned toward Ethan. The whispers grew again, but this time they were filled with surprise. "Is he serious? That thing can't even shoot that far. Why's the general wasting his time?" Ethan stood slowly, his movements calm and steady. He picked up the rifle with care, as if it were something fragile and precious. Without a word, he walked toward the firing line. The laughter quieted. Even the young Marines who had mocked him earlier now leaned forward with curious eyes. He placed the orange rifle on the stand, adjusted the scope, and took a long, deep breath. His fingers moved with quiet confidence, checking every detail, every setting, every adjustment. To the onlookers, it was almost strange. He moved not with nervousness, but with familiarity, as though this was not the first time he had stood in this position. The general crossed his arms. Watching closely, Ethan turned his head slightly. "How far is your longest target today?" he asked in a calm voice. 5,000 meters, the general replied firmly. "No one has hit it yet." A ripple of surprise moved through the Marines. 5,000 meters was considered impossible by most. It was a distance so great that even the sharpest shooters rarely attempted it. Ethan nodded once. He said nothing more. The Marines leaned closer, whispering again. "There's no way. He'll embarrass himself. That orange thing won't even reach that far." But this time their laughter was nervous. There was something in the way Ethan held himself, something in the calm steadiness of his movements that made even the most doubtful Marines hesitate. Ethan lowered himself into position. He looked through the scope, his breathing even, his body still. The world around him seemed to fall away. The laughter, the whispers, even the heat of the sun. All that remained was the target, small and distant, waiting in the silence. And in that silence, Ethan remembered. He remembered the fields where silence had meant survival. He remembered the nights when he had waited for hours. His breath the only sound he trusted. He remembered every lesson, every mission, every moment that had shaped him. He was no longer a young recruit desperate for approval. He was no longer a soldier searching for medals. He was a father carrying the memory of a little girl who once painted his rifle orange so he would never lose it. And he knew, without a doubt, that he would not miss. The air at the Marine training range grew heavy with silence. For hours, the sound of rifles had echoed like thunder across the wide field. But now all eyes were fixed on one man. Ethan Walker, the quiet veteran with the bright orange rifle, stood at the firing line. His movements were calm, steady, and without hurry, as though time itself had slowed for him. The young Marines, who had been laughing earlier, now leaned forward with curiosity. The general, standing tall with his hands behind his back, kept his eyes locked on Ethan. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ethan lowered himself to the ground, the orange rifle resting gently against his shoulder. His body moved with the discipline of someone who had done this countless times before. Every adjustment was precise, checking the scope, measuring the distance, steadying his breathing. It was a ritual he had lived for years, one that had been carved deep into his memory. 5,000 meters, the general reminded him, his voice strong but calm. That's the mark. Ethan gave a single nod. He did not boast, he did not smile. He simply looked through the scope, his eyes narrowing as the distant target came into view. The Marines began whispering again, though their voices were softer now, filled more with doubt than mockery. He can't make that shot. No one's hit it yet. That orange thing isn't even built for a distance like that, but there was something different in the way they spoke. The laughter was gone. Now there was tension, a kind of nervous respect that none of them wanted to admit out loud. One Marine muttered under his breath, "Still, he looks like he knows what he's doing." Ethan's hands were steady as stone. He adjusted the windage, then the elevation, his fingers moving with a memory that felt almost automatic. For him, this moment was not about showing off. It was not about silencing laughter or proving the young Marines wrong. It was about focus, about remembering who he was and why he carried this rifle, not for glory, not for war, but for the bond it carried between him and his daughter. In his mind, he could almost hear Lily's voice. "Don't lose it, Daddy. It will make you smile." The bright orange paint had once seemed strange to him, but now, in this moment, it felt like a symbol of hope. The rifle was not just a weapon. It was a piece of his heart, wrapped in the memory of a little girl's love. The range was quiet, but inside Ethan's mind, memories stirred. He remembered the long nights overseas, lying still for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. He remembered the way the world seemed to narrow down to a single point, the target, and how everything else faded away. He remembered the pressure of knowing that one mistake could change everything, but he also remembered the victories, the moments when patience, training, and calm had carried him through. The moments when silence turned into success. Those memories didn't haunt him. They shaped him. They gave him the calmness he carried now. A voice broke the silence. It was one of the younger Marines trying to sound confident but failing to hide the tremble in his tone. "He's going to miss." Another whispered back, "I don't know. Look at him. He doesn't even flinch." Even the older veterans at the far side of the range leaned closer, their expressions serious. They had seen men like Ethan before, men who carried themselves with quiet certainty. They knew that kind of confidence was not built in a day. It came from experience, from discipline, from years of doing what others thought impossible. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible. He felt the trigger under his finger, cool and familiar. The rifle seemed to merge with him as though it was not an object in his hands but an extension of himself. He didn't think about the laughter he had heard earlier. He didn't think about the whispers. He didn't even think about the general standing behind him. His focus was on the target and nothing else. The wind shifted slightly. Ethan adjusted for it without hesitation. His eyes never left the mark. His breathing slowed to a rhythm he had practiced for years, steady, patient, controlled. And then, with a calmness that stunned the watching crowd, he squeezed the trigger. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and powerful. For a moment, it was the only sound on the range. The bullet tore through the sky, vanishing into the distance, traveling toward a target so far away that it was barely visible. Every Marine held their breath. The silence stretched long and heavy. Seconds passed like hours. Some looked through scopes, others simply stared, waiting. Then, faint but clear, came the sound. Clang, it echoed across the field, bouncing back from the distant target. A perfect hit. The silence that followed was different now. Not mocking, not doubtful. It was heavy with awe. The Marines stared in disbelief, their mouths slightly open, their laughter long forgotten. The general, who had been watching through his binoculars, slowly lowered them, his face unreadable. One young Marine whispered, "No way." Another muttered, He hit it?" And another said softly, "At 5,000 meters." The older veterans nodded slowly as if they had expected nothing less. They exchanged glances of quiet respect, knowing they had just witnessed something that would not be easily forgotten. Ethan did not celebrate. He did not smile or boast. He simply lowered the rifle, checked it carefully, and set it down with the same calmness he had shown all morning. To him, the shot was not about impressing anyone. It was about discipline, focus, and memory. It was about proving, if only to himself, that he still carried the skills that once defined him. But more than that, it was about Lily. When he told her about this day, he wanted to tell her the truth, that the orange rifle had done something remarkable, and that the laughter of others had turned into silence. The general finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in his words. "Skill like that doesn't fade," he said. "It only sharpens with purpose." The Marines stood frozen, unsure how to respond. They had mocked the man with the orange rifle, but now they looked at him with new eyes. Not as a stranger, not as an old man, but as someone who carried something they could not yet understand. Ethan gave a small nod, not to the general, not to the Marines, but to himself. He packed up the rifle slowly, carefully, as though it were made of glass. The whispers had stopped. The laughter was gone. As he walked back to the bench, the orange paint of the rifle shone in the sunlight. It did not look silly now. It looked different. It looked like a story none of them knew, but all of them wanted to hear. And for the first time that day, the range was filled not with noise, but with quiet respect. The sound of the bullet striking the faraway target still echoed faintly across the training range. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if time had frozen, holding everyone in the moment. The Marines who had been whispering earlier stared at the distant target, their faces filled with disbelief. The young men who had laughed at Ethan's orange rifle were now quiet, their pride replaced with something else, respect mixed with awe. Ethan Walker lowered the rifle gently, as though it was more than just a piece of steel. His hands did not tremble. His face showed no hint of victory or pride. He simply set the orange rifle back on its stand, adjusted the scope cap, and exhaled softly. For him, it was just another shot, a memory brought back to life. But for the others on the range, it was something unforgettable. The general broke the silence first. He removed the binoculars from his eyes, his face calm but his gaze sharper than before. He had seen many shooters in his career, some young, some old, some skilled, some reckless. But what he had just witnessed was more than skill. It was patience, discipline, and focus that belonged to a rare kind of soldier. "Confirmed hit," the general said firmly. His words carried across the range like an announcement. The younger Marines gasped quietly. Some exchanged glances, their earlier laughter now seeming childish in their own ears. Others looked at Ethan with wide eyes as if they were seeing him for the very first time. One Marine whispered almost to himself, 5,000 meters. He actually did it. Another shook his head slowly. "I thought it was impossible." And another said, voice low but full of realization, "That wasn't luck. He knew exactly what he was doing." The group of older veterans who had been watching silently from the side nodded with quiet satisfaction. They understood. They had served long enough to recognize the difference between a lucky shot and a professional one. Ethan's shot was not an accident. It was the result of years of training, endless discipline, and a calmness that only came from experience. Ethan did not look at the crowd. He did not respond to their whispers. Instead, he carefully packed the rifle back into its worn case. His movements were slow and steady, almost ceremonial. To him, this rifle was not just metal and paint. It was a gift from his daughter, a memory wrapped in bright orange and a symbol of everything he still carried inside him. As he zipped the case shut, his thoughts wandered briefly to Lily. He pictured her sitting at the kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her, her small hands holding a pencil. She would ask him later about the rifle. She always did. And this time he would have something new to tell her. "Yes, sweetheart. The orange rifle was strong today. It reminded people that sometimes the things we laugh at carry the most meaning. Meanwhile, the young Marines couldn't hold back their questions. How did he do that? One asked. Was it the rifle? Another wondered. No, said a third quietly. It was him. Their voices carried both curiosity and admiration. They had doubted him. They had laughed at the bright paint and the old rifle. But now they saw that the man behind it was far more important than the color or the age of his weapon. The general approached Ethan, his boots striking the ground with deliberate steps. The crowd of Marines watched closely, waiting to see what he would say. The general stopped in front of Ethan and spoke in a steady voice. Skill like that doesn't fade. It stays and it sharpens with purpose. Ethan looked up, meeting the general's eyes. There was no arrogance in his expression, only quiet respect. He gave a small nod but said nothing. Words were not necessary. The shot had spoken for him. The general studied him for a moment longer, then gave a firm nod of his own before turning back toward the group. His silence spoke volumes. The Marines shifted uneasily, their earlier jokes echoing in their minds. They had laughed at Ethan, but now they couldn't stop replaying the moment of his shot. The sound of the bullet striking the distant target seemed to echo again and again, louder each time in their memory. One Marine muttered, "We mocked him, and he just did what none of us could." Another replied softly, "Maybe that's the lesson." Ethan sat back down on the bench, resting his hands on the closed case of his rifle. His body relaxed, but his mind was calm, focused. He wasn't here for applause. He wasn't here to prove anyone wrong. He was here because part of him missed the feel of the range, the focus of aiming, and the discipline of waiting for the right moment. And maybe, just maybe, he was here to remind himself that the man he used to be was still alive within him. The respect of the crowd didn't matter as much as the thought of going home and telling Lily about his day. He could already imagine her wide eyes when he told her about the shot. 5,000 meters, Daddy, really? She would smile and laugh, and he would nod, and that would be enough. As the range activity resumed, the younger Marines tried to continue their practice. But something had changed. Their hands were steady, but their minds were distracted. Every time they raised their rifles, they couldn't help but glance toward Ethan, the quiet veteran who had done the impossible with a painted rifle that looked like a toy. Their shots echoed across the field, but none carried the same weight as Ethan's single round. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Sweat beaded on the Marines' foreheads, and the day pressed on with drills and training. Yet beneath the noise of gunfire and orders, a new silence had settled over the group, a silence of thought, of respect, of realization. They had seen something rare, something they would not forget. Later, as Ethan prepared to leave, he lifted his rifle case and walked toward his truck. The Marines stepped aside without being asked. Some nodded quietly, others looked down, ashamed of their earlier words. A few managed soft greetings, but Ethan responded only with a polite nod. He did not need apologies. He did not need recognition. At the far side of the range, the older veterans raised their hands in small salutes as Ethan passed by. He returned the gesture with quiet dignity. They understood one another. Nothing more needed to be said. When Ethan climbed into his truck, he paused for a moment, his hand resting on the steering wheel. He looked at the case beside him, the bright orange rifle safe inside. For a brief moment, a small smile touched his lips. Not because of the shot, not because of the silence it had caused, but because of what it meant. It meant that the laughter of strangers had no power. It meant that his daughter's gift was stronger than doubt. And it meant that even after years away from the battlefield, the calm strength within him still lived on. With that thought, Ethan started the truck and drove away, leaving behind a range full of Marines who would never look at him, or at the color orange, the same way again. The old truck rattled down the quiet road as the sun began to set, painting the sky with colors of gold and soft orange. Ethan Walker drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the rifle case beside him. The bright paint on the rifle was hidden from sight, but its presence filled the cab with a kind of warmth. He did not feel proud in the way others might expect. There was no need for cheering, no hunger for recognition. What Ethan carried was quieter, deeper, a sense of peace. He had done what he came to do. He had shown himself and everyone else that some things never fade. As the road stretched ahead, his thoughts drifted back to Lily. He could already see her sitting by the window, waiting for him to return, her schoolbook scattered across the table. She would ask about his day and he would tell her. Not everything, but enough. Enough for her to know that the orange rifle had not been a joke, and that sometimes laughter can be turned into silence. Back at the range, the atmosphere remained heavy, even after Ethan's departure. The young Marines struggled to focus on their drills, their minds replaying the sound of his single shot hitting the impossible target. The image of the quiet veteran lowering his painted rifle lingered like a shadow over the field. No one dared laugh anymore. The whispers that filled the air earlier were gone, replaced with thoughtful silence. A few Marines spoke, quietly among themselves. "We judged him by what he carried," one admitted. "We didn't see who he really was," another added. "And we all learned a lesson today," said a third. The general stood, near the edge of the range, watching his men. His face was calm, but his mind was turning. He had expected a simple demonstration, a routine day of practice. Instead, he had witnessed something rare, an act of quiet mastery that reminded him of the weight of experience. The general did not speak much afterward, but his eyes carried a message that the young Marines understood clearly. Respect is not earned by the shine of your weapon or the crispness of your uniform, but by the steadiness of your spirit. Meanwhile, Ethan's truck pulled into the driveway of his small home. The porch light glowed faintly, though the sun had not fully set. Through the window, he could see Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her head bent over her notebook. She looked up as she heard the truck door close, her face lighting up instantly with joy. "Daddy," she called, running to the door. Ethan smiled softly as he stepped inside, placing the rifle case down carefully by the wall. Lily threw her arms around him and he hugged her tightly, feeling the smallness of her frame and the warmth of her love. "You're home," she said, her voice full of excitement. "How was it? Did you use the orange rifle?" Ethan chuckled gently, brushing her hair back from her face. "Yes, sweetheart, I did." "Did it make people smile?" she asked eagerly. He paused for a moment, thinking of the silence that had followed his shot, the stunned faces of the Marines, the general's firm words. Finally, he nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "It made them understand." They sat together at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many evenings of homework, dinners, and quiet talks. Lily's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Tell me everything," she said. Ethan leaned back, his voice calm but filled with warmth. He told her about the range, about the laughter when they first saw the rifle, and about the long silence that followed his shot. He didn't use big words or dramatic details. He told the story simply, in a way she could understand. "And then," she whispered, leaning closer. "And then," Ethan said with a gentle smile. They stopped laughing. They saw the truth. Lily clapped her hands with joy. "I knew it. I told you the orange paint would help. It makes it special." Ethan laughed softly. "Yes, you were right. It is special. Not because of the paint, but because of what it means." "What does it mean?" she asked. Ethan looked at her with eyes full of love. "It means that even when people don't understand, even when they laugh, you must hold on to what matters to you. One day they will see." The evening passed quietly. They ate dinner together, simple food but filled with the comfort of home. Lily told him about her school day, about her teacher, about the book she was reading. Ethan listened with patience, nodding, smiling, and asking gentle questions. He treasured these moments more than anything else in the world. Later, as he tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him and said, "Daddy, I'm proud of you." Ethan's heart warmed at her words. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. Always." As she drifted off to sleep, Ethan sat quietly by her side for a few minutes, watching her breathe peacefully. The orange rifle rested in its case by the door, silent but powerful in its own way. It had carried him through many chapters of his life, through war, through memory, through laughter and doubt. But now it was more than a tool. It was a story, a bond, a reminder that strength comes not from what others see, but from what you carry inside. In the days that followed, word spread quietly among the Marines about the veteran with the orange rifle. Stories grew, retold in hushed tones, each Marine adding his own detail to the tale. Some said the shot was perfect, others claimed it was beyond perfect, but all agreed on one thing. They would never forget the man who carried himself with silence, who did not argue, who did not boast, and who proved everything with a single round. Some of the young Marines even found themselves painting small marks of orange on their gear, not to copy him, but to remind themselves of the lesson. A symbol that strength does not need to shine. Sometimes it only needs to endure. Back at home, Ethan continued his simple life. He went to work, cooked meals, and helped Lily with her studies. The range was behind him now, but the peace it had given him stayed. Every time he saw the orange rifle resting in its case, he smiled, remembering the moment when silence turned into respect. For him, the greatest victory was not hitting the target at 5,000 meters. It was walking away knowing that his daughter's gift, something born from love and innocence, had carried a message stronger than any medal could. And so, the story of Ethan Walker, the single father, the quiet veteran, the man with the orange rifle, lived on. Not because of glory, not because of recognition, but because of the simple truth it carried. Respect is not earned by what you carry in your hands. Respect is earned by what you carry in your heart. And in Ethan's heart, there was something stronger than any weapon, stronger than any doubt. There was the love of a daughter, bright as the orange paint that covered his rifle.